If you're building a home lab, you've probably hit this wall. Everyone tells you to use Docker, but then you see tech professionals talking about Podman. Is one actually better than the other, or is it just tech gatekeeping? Today, I'm going to break down the real difference for your projects without the headache, so you can pick the right engine and move on to actually building things. Welcome back to TechSimpld, where we make complex software easy to understand. If you're ready to optimize your digital workspace and build better workflows in 2026, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. It would really mean a lot to me. The biggest technical difference isn't the code, it's the daemon. Docker relies on a background service that's always running. It's like a cafe with staff. It's helpful, but it takes up space and resources 24/7. Podman is daemonless. It's like a vending machine. You go up, request your container, and it runs. No extra background fluff. We've already talked about the architecture, but let's talk about security for a second. Because Docker relies on that central daemon, if someone somehow exploits a container and gains access to that daemon, they essentially get root access to your entire server. With Podman's direct process model, your containers run rootless by default. If a container gets compromised, the damage is trapped inside that single process. It can't break out and hijack your machine. The great thing about both of these container engines is they both use the Open Container Initiative, or OCI standards. The commands are completely identical. All you have to do is change one word. If you're used to using Docker, change the word Docker to Podman, or vice versa. If you use Docker Compose files, change them to Podman Compose. When it comes to the performance comparison on a home lab, like Proxmox or Raspberry Pi, it's important to separate the myths from the actual benchmark data. This is where Podman completely steals the show for lightweight servers. Because Docker relies on a centralized background daemon, it takes up roughly 140 to 180 megabytes of system RAM, just idling, even if you have zero containers currently running. Podman has no daemon, which means its idle resource footprint is exactly 0 megabytes. It uses absolutely nothing until you actively call a container process. If you're running on a 2 gig virtual private server or an older thin client, saving that memory footprint just to keep the engine alive is a massive deal. You'll see some tech blogs claiming that Podman launches containers way faster because it doesn't have to talk to a daemon middleman. But in my real world benchmarks on warm images, it's basically a statistical tie. Launching basic containers takes roughly 340 to 350 milliseconds on both engines. Docker's daemon round trip costs essentially nothing in performance latency. That being said, technically, Podman does start containers slightly faster, but it's so negligible, it doesn't really matter to the average home user. Let's talk about use cases and management. If you just want to host a handful of basic services like Pi-hole, a Plex server, a Jellyfin media server, or simple Home Assistant dashboard, then there's virtually no difference how these engines perform. Your Pi-hole will block ads exactly the same way. You'll still be able to see all your media on your Jellyfin server, and your Home Assistant dashboard will still run. But here's why most everyday users choose Docker. When a random community guide tells you to copy and paste a template or a volume mount command, it's pre-formatted for Docker. With Docker, you get absolute zero friction deployment. You copy, you paste, your apps work, and you go back to your day. Podman hasn't been widely adopted as much as Docker has. Here's where the real difference comes in. Docker is ideal for enterprise, large-scale deployments, and broad industry adoption, because that's what industries have been using for a long time. But if you're treating your home lab like a professional training ground for a tech career, Podman completely changes the game. In the professional world, the massive tech companies aren't just using raw Docker commands anymore. They're using Red Hat Enterprise Linux and Kubernetes orchestration. Podman was built from the ground up to mirror those exact enterprise platforms. When you learn how to group your containers into pods natively inside of Podman, you're not just hosting software at home, you're practicing the exact architectural workflows used by enterprise engineers going forward. So, is there an actual difference to the apps you're running? No. But to you, if you want maximum convenience and tutorials that never fail, use Docker. If you want a lightweight, secure system that teaches you professional Red Hat skills, choose Podman. Me personally, I started on Docker. I still use Docker today in my home lab. At my job, I've started using Podman. At the end of the day, if you're running your home lab, the real answer is pick what you want. Are you comfortable using Docker? Then stay with Docker. If you want to try something new, maybe try switching to Podman and see how it's different. In future videos, I plan to go through a couple containers that I like to use personally. I'll probably be doing that in Docker, but I'll make sure to post both the Docker and the Podman files for everybody to use. I know this was a bit of a shorter video, but I hope you learned something. If you did, I'd really appreciate you putting a like on the video or subscribing to the channel. It really helps me get these videos out in front of other people who may want to see them. I'm TechSimpld, and I'll see you in the next one.